Howdy. So we're going to talk about RINs. This is my project from my time at Mercuria called RIN stacking. I thought that was pretty catchy. And we're going to be looking at some gaps in the renewable energy markets out there. And featured here, I got a DS barge, it's a manifest rail, and I think that's the New Haven terminal. So yeah, exciting stuff. So these markets are all made from legislation. The U.S. government passed the renewable fuel standard in 2005, extended it through 2006, 2007, and that brought about the RFS mandates for renewable volume obligations for refiners. So the EPA is the presiding body over this piece of legislation, and basically they determine a cap and trade model quota for refiners to blend a certain amount of renewable biofuel into their outputs. And this also means that we have a quota to meet that can be settled with retired credits, and that is the renewable identification numbers, or RINs. So that's how they keep track of quotas with the cap and trade model, is these RINs. And California and Canada have also followed suit now with these models. California developed the low carbon fuel standard, or LCFs, and Canada has the CFRs now, or the clean fuel regulations, and that came out last year. So pretty new stuff. In terms of market dynamics, these markets for the actual credits have very low liquidity and high volatility, and it reminds me a lot of crypto or NFTs, where the supply is very trivial compared to physical product that can be, that can actually be touched, felt. It's all tangible, right? And then there's another side to this with RINs, and they kind of use this word interchangeably. RINs can be physical product with ethanol, or like other biofuels out there, and that's K1 RINs. And then there's the credit side, and these are the unassigned or detached RINs, and that's K2. And they also see a lot of competition in these markets from New York with Citadel or Vitol or any of those competitors with large volume orders. And so one thing that they see in these markets, and especially with the similarity to crypto, is a lot of the competitors will put in huge volume orders, and that'll just manipulate the price like crazy. So the two sides of risk here, as we see this kind of play out, is the government and their mandates, and then the competitors with their huge desks that are trading large volumes in a low liquidity market. It's just going to have a huge impact on price. So that's actually where everybody looks, is just those two facets of the market. Everybody does block trading through brokerages, and scheduling is done through barges and rail. So in Mercuria, we had a guy that had manifest rail duties in the Midwest and Canada, and that was their area or region of operation. What they did was actually pretty, it was pretty marvelous. They scheduled cars, just like separate storage entities for transport, with FOB whatever destination, and they would just record it, and that was one way of scheduling. And then barges, you actually got to reach out to the barge companies, and you actually have to coordinate with them to get them to take your product, and have like demurrage fees, detention fees, all of that good stuff that goes into scheduling. At the same time, these markets are actually really complicated. They have different classes of RINs, so or different types of RINs. It spans from D3 to D7. D5 are advanced biofuels, and D3 are cellulosic biofuels. D6 would be like the sugarcane from Brazil. That's actually like a big expanding market right now, like huge opportunities there. And that's something that I got to learn all about at Mercuria, is how Brazil sugarcane, that's a fairly new horizon out there for the ethanol market. And then E24s, that's a big, I mean, that's just, that's the D6, typical D6 that we would trade, that we would see being traded in those trade confirmation emails. So, yeah, it spans across a bunch of different classes of RINs, and they're not all the same. And then there's going to be another layer on top of that we'll get into. And this is how they're made. So like with NFTs can be generated if or I guess crypto could be generated if you buy an NFT, right? It could be, hey, if you mint this NFT, you get this amount of Bitcoin, right? Kind of same deal here for RINs. So basically, if I import biofuels from, let's say from Canada to the United States, we actually are eligible as a company to get RINs, right? So we were able to declare that with customs, and we're able to actually generate some RINs for us that are assigned to the product that we're importing. Domestic biofuel production, of course, blending, those can generate RINs. And then there's and the way that my supervisors said it, I mean, they were just like, dude, anything can generate RINs. It's just arbitrary at this point. Even charging EVs and building charging stations can generate RINs. Like stuff along the lines of that, where you're just kind of like, I don't know if that's the right thing here. That'll be the case. You'll just get RINs, and you're just kind of like, okay. Mercuria has actual ethanol production facilities, or just plants in general, with Argo and Stony Island. Those were the rolling inventories that they kept track of pretty closely, just because of the trader. He needed to make sure, hey, like if we have this inventory on hand, if we don't, we need to get it from somewhere, right? We got to source this. We got to make sure that we keep up with this. And there's also at these terminals, right? So if like at Argo, for example, or Seawarren or New Haven, Connecticut, they actually have a threshold that they have to be at. So it's like if you're trading any sort of securities on margin, you have like a margin requirement for your inventory, and you have to be there. And if not, then you got to buy it from somebody that's also in the same terminal. So like Pete's or not Pete's, Poet's supply. We actually had an incident in the office where we went below our margin requirement for inventory at the terminal, so we had to buy from them. So yeah, that's a pretty big fire. It was pretty brutal, and yeah. And then we actually met. We had a meeting regarding CFRs and how that impacts us in our business, since we do manifest rail in the north. So basically, we are a qualified import party, and so we have to be in certain terms with customs in order to generate CFRs. But I'm pretty sure that we sorted that out. And then there's also a lot of service costs. And whenever I say service costs, I mean like operating costs and also interest costs, so like the cost of the cost of debt, all that stuff that goes into this. That we have to be thinking about. So like inspections, for example, we have to pay for. We actually have to coordinate those too. It's not like it's just done automatically, which I think would be pretty nice if they would just look at our product and say, hey, this is quality stuff. But we got to make sure that this stuff is fungible at least. I mean, it has to fit into the benchmarks that we set for these products and do QA. So. But yeah, inspections were actually pretty costly and pretty time-consuming stuff to worry about. So a lot of service costs that go into scheduling, and that goes into the price of RINs that we have to think about. Ethanol operations. This is my team that I was assigned to. These are awesome people to work with, and so Mr. AAA, Ren Hefe, as I knew him. So he was trading K2 detached RINs. So he was the one that was taking all of the more crypto, not physical stuff and trading it, and he would trade it pretty aggressively. Then there's the more operations side of things. The operations team was a bunch of schedulers. It had the K1 trader, Pete, and basically they had to track inventory really closely. They had a different person doing K2 inventory tracking for Rod. So Rod was, trading K2s, and then there was a separate spreadsheet for his K2s, and then we had K1 RINs on a different one with all the physical and operations schedulers kind of working together on that area. So basically, whenever you're trading physical ethanol, you do have to worry about K1 RINs. And if you're buying product, right? So, I mean, whatever FOB that you're looking at, if you're taking on product, you're also going to receive RINs. So you have to accept those RINs in the EMTS system with the EPA. What was really cool to watch is you can actually just block trade from anywhere if you have if you have self service, you can do it because all this stuff is through brokerages. So they just call Blue Ocean, for example, right? Like you can just call them and put your trade through, right? I mean, it takes more of like coordination, but you could go on a skiing trip, for example, and you could call in a trade and really just it's kind of like that relationship selling part of the business where it's more like sales, right? Where you're trying to sell as much as you can for the highest price, right? And you're trying to buy as low as possible, like buy first, sell first, right? Or vice versa in the market. So that was awesome to see. There's also a different regions, like how I talked about. So NOLA barges, for example, we had somebody that was scheduling NOLA barges. And then there's Argo that's shared. That's a shared operation between two schedulers. And then there's Shell Sea Warren and New Haven, Connecticut barges. So that was my other boss, Kyle's job. Yeah. So some of my daily tasks at Mercuria were a ton of emails. So something that I haven't really experienced yet working in the real world is how many emails it becomes in the inbox, because on my first day I signed in, I already had 3,000 emails just waiting. So I mean, this is a big part of the industry. It's really apparent that they really like to do business through email. Another thing is Excel. So Excel is definitely like the go-to for everybody, especially with VBA macros if you want to do anything cool with it. Because Excel does not have query functionality out of the box. So one thing that they do is, you can buy Microsoft Suite 2016, right? That's a big license that companies will buy. The downside is you cannot query like SQL with it. So, if you've ever used Access before, you're not going to be able to do any of that SQL stuff. So you can't really do powerful queries, right? And so that's where I kind of went off, I went rogue on that end, and I went more towards Power BI so that I could actually work with tables in a way that would be connected to a UI, kind of like how we would build software with a front end, back end tech stack. I'm pretty used to that as an engineer, so I really crave that, and that's where Power BI came in. You can look at Tableau and stuff like that, but they won't let you use that stuff. So Power BI, really cool. You can set up, API integrations with it, or connections as they call it, through URL. Really great stuff. On the other hand, I was learning with the operations team, sitting with them. In terms of trading, I didn't want to bother Rod too much, so I kind of, I was, trying to kind of ask questions, but also, let him breathe, let him do his thing, because what he does is truly magical. And then the allocation software that they use was actually really interesting. It's all .NET, so it's pretty outdated, and they have a database that is it's non-structured. It's batch dumps of data with no primary keys. So that was a new thing to me, but it also makes sense because of how the trading data is, and a lot of the times companies will outsource this kind of thing for cheap. So you can't really expect to have like the greatest, most well thought out like PostgreSQL database in the world. Would that help? Probably, just because you could like relate back to trades and have better queries that give you more insights. But at the same time, they're just looking for Excel stuff here. So the allocation software does the job. And then Teams meetings, they had stand-ups, regular stand-ups, just as you would have in any other company. So what they really like to do too is they would have like a certain topic for that week that they'd really focus on. A lot of the times just rolling into the new year, a lot of companies try to do the whole consulting thing where they try to figure out, hey, how can we make this process more efficient, just kind of streamline, optimize everything. It's really tough to do that though, right? Because we're not here authorizing software to be used. We're not going out there and buying new software, onboarding new startups or SaaS providers. So it's pretty trivial stuff to do. It's convoluted, but at the same time, it's not impossible. So it was really cool to work with them on that and see like how they were doing things and see if I had any suggestions. So I went ahead on the first day and just made a folder just called Steve the Intern in all caps, and I just started going. I was just writing down stuff in Notion with like a bunch of like suggestions, and I actually use agile software, so like linear stuff like that. Huge fan of that. So yeah. And then I also had side quests. So aside from like my direct supervisors, I worked with Tyson in Canada. Just like from the Houston office, I was just calling with him. He does more swap trading, so he's really focused on the CUA asset market. What was really cool too is he had the opportunity to spec out some software for me. So it was kind of like he wanted some advanced Excel functionality. I basically had this whole week with him where he was just trying to spec this thing, and he was like, I think I kind of want it this way, and it was cool to see him really just kind of hash out this full-fledged kind of dashboard for the swaps that he was trading. And then also the crush spread, that was the first thing that I did, and that was actually Rod was just kind of like, hey, look, man, like you should start learning this. Here's some articles for you. Let's start getting you, oriented with all this stuff. And so the crush spread was the first thing that he kind of showed to me. The Python database SDK. So basically, towards the end of my time at Mercuria, they kind of had this software problem where they're like, hey, look, the ethanol desk really needs software. They don't want to buy it. I mean, that there's a whole lot of red tape, and you got to build a front over that. There's a lot of corporate stuff going on. So hey, look, let's just see, what you can do. So I basically came up with a whole stack for them, and I talked with Aaron, one of my colleagues, and I was just like, hey, look, if you want to do this, you got to have this type of database. You got to deploy it here, right? You're going to look at like AWS, for example, right? And you got to have all these things in place. You got to build it with a certain front-end framework. You could build your own, or you could use like Remix or Next. So that kind of thing. But one main thing is he was using Python data frames. That's cool stuff, but in order to build it with like actual software, you have to make like a Django REST framework or something like that. So just really building out that SDK was important so that more people can query stuff. Because that was one of the major issues walking in is like, hey, we have a ton of interns right now. Nobody knows how to query Python. They don't know how to access the database. What's going on here, right? Web scraping. Web scraping is always important because a lot of companies and a lot of government APIs don't have or a lot of government websites don't have APIs. They don't have actual endpoints that we can hit to get JSON objects. Really important idea there because in business you want to be working with the most efficient data form. Web scraping is not it, but at least you have the data, right? Because you can actually work with the HTML on the page, and you can actually filter it. So at least we got something there to do with code instead of nothing. And then EMTS formatting. So this is like the actual EPA dashboard. It would be the equivalent of a Bitcoin wallet, for example. And basically they have a scheduler for K1 that does the EMTS system, and then for K2 that was more LCFS. For those credits, that was like they basically focused with K2 on California, but with EMTS that was more K1 with the assigned RINs, and that process required us to format data in a certain way to upload it so that we could actually schedule a trade to happen or to actually process some information through the dashboard. We had to format it in Excel before doing it. Which was actually pretty time consuming because we had to paste in stuff manually. Whereas I was developing this React software, and I later just settled for a VBA macro because they wouldn't let me have Node on the Windows computer at the office, so I would have to use my actual laptop, which is not my personal laptop with all my software development tools like VS Code and whatnot. So that I just settled for a VBA macro. I figured it out. It was good. And then the stocks models. The stocks, just looking at like feedstocks. Feedstocks are important because, as with like the crush spread, you're looking at the actual like base product or commodity. So like soybeans, stuff like that. Stocks are important because we can look at supply side economics and we can start to see the equilibrium and gaps between pricing and where we think it should be and what it is right now. So these are all my blocked projects. So I had a lot of really good ideas. I wanted to go in there and learn a lot, but also be like a consultant, just be like, hey, look, I've seen a lot of stuff in the software, fintech industry in Austin. So I was like, hey, look, let me propose some stuff. Email automation, right? There's just like a ton of emails, just thousands of them every day. They send allocation emails, PTDs, letters of credit, all this stuff through email. And you'll get a ton, like, it's not just your coworkers like sending email. It's just like every counterparty the company has ever dealt with. You'll get stuff from like accounts and like settlements, and you'll just get everybody's emails. And one of the most important things that I kind of came across is, hey, look, like we should probably sort this out a little bit because it'll get tough to, it'll get tough. Like you have to be very detail oriented, right? And that'll come up later too. But I had this idea like, hey, like I've worked with AI pretty closely. I've built generative models and like also modal models with AI with very advanced embeddings. And I was like, hey, look, we can make something really special here because the formatting of these emails is pretty standard. And if it ever changes, you'll have that extra layer of intelligence with AI embeddings to make sure that we can adapt with those and not have to worry about any deprecated software. So that's kind of something to think about in the future. It could be big here. Collaborative email messages into teams. One thing that I like to do with lead generation for all of my companies is I like to post leads to Slack. And so I like to have messages, just like notifications with like Slack or Discord. You can do that with Teams too. So that's actually, Teams, you can schedule it for your personal email or like your company account email. Another security thing though, giving access to that, it's just a no-go, right? They totally close off the email access, so can't do that. Ticketing systems. So Linear is one of those like agile management systems. You can create a task and you can assign like, hey, this is like, what kind of urgency is this? Do we need to get this done? What sort of like in the pipeline, what stage is it at? That sort of thing. Zapier is for like automation, but it's more drag and drop, no code software. Really great for automating or scheduling emails. Building workflows, kind of like a HubSpot workflow type of software. So really great product. There's also make.com. If you ever want to check that out, I highly recommend. And then we also looked at, replacement software. So I was kind of like, okay, well, maybe if they gave me access to the database, I could build something really beautiful, really sleek and optimized for them to work with for the ethanol desk. That's more proprietary. And hey, they don't have to pay for, Trax logistics software because, we already have the database right here. It has, the best practice, industry standard React TypeScript you can get. We can build a full server with Node, use TSOA with Express, serve everything, make it super just awesome for them, right? And just make it a really great experience. Definitely not feasible in the short term. Not a good idea I'm used to building this stuff in like a week. You can't do that in this industry. You got to plan it out. You got to build a front, and you got to justify why you're doing it. The .NET stuff worked for them, and they're sticking with that, right? And then access to production database, not a good idea for interns. Interns are temporary workers, and you probably don't want them, dealing with any sort of data that's proprietary or, sensitive that they could update, because that stuff is, we are legally responsible for that at the end of the day. So, yeah, definitely not a good idea to let interns give them access to a production database, but it is good for the seniors. I would be able to hold my own, no doubt, but at the same time, if it uses a different setup than SQL or any of like the best practice stuff, it could get pretty, risky there. So probably not the best idea. Key takeaways from this experience for me, this actually really gave me really great insight into these markets, and especially drawing connections from this market into like retail or wholesale or DC inventory. That really helped there. Fires can pop up at any time, just like in my full time work. If some software or if some server goes down, or if some database, or if AWS is having an issue, for example, right? Yeah, like that's a fire. Like we got to put that out, and at the end of the day, we got to get that fixed, right? And so like, there's really no rest. Like it's not just like a 9 to 5, right? Like you have like there's no like day off, for example. Like you have to get the job done. This is what you're responsible for, and you got to do it, right? Um, you also have to be really detail oriented, right? You have to be watching your inbox for new emails, and you have to know which ones are for you. You have to know, hey, I am responsible for this allocation right here, and this is what we're doing this now, and so that took some getting used to, because for me, with agile, you have like a signee with like name. It's very straightforward. With the email stuff, not really, but it's a system that they have in place, and it works. It definitely works. It just yeah, has that learning curve and an adjustment period. And so I actually sat down with the K1 RIN scheduler, and she explained how filtering emails is something that she really thought was helpful for adjusting and basically optimizing that system. So setting up filters in Outlook, that's really important. And then you have to take care of business, like I said earlier, with that margin requirement for inventory at the terminals. You gotta look out for your ethanol on hand. You gotta make sure it doesn't go below the minimum. And if it does, you will have to be like, they will tell you, and they will shoot you an invoice saying, hey, we got it from this supplier, and now you gotta pay up. And so it's just brutal. They'll just send you invoices, and also like you can't be lazy or complacent, and you shouldn't take, hey, this is an invoice for you, this is payable, for you. You got to pay up. Like you have to really keep track of this, and you can actually, contest this stuff and say, hey, look, I don't think this is right. And what was interesting is, whenever we were dealing with counterparties, a lot of majors, what they'll do is their schedulers won't even be paying attention, because they buy so much, right? They're buying so much product. They're just continuously buying. They're not really keeping close track, and so sometimes their invoices are off, or sometimes they fail to invoice you, and you're just kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? But that kind of stuff is really important. You can't just take somebody's word for it. You got to actually check, and you got to be on your game here. You got to be active. You got to be deterministic, and you got to be a market maker. And you got to understand that, like, this is your job. This is what's going on, and we're just knock this out of the park. It's gonna be a home run every time, right? And you just got to be confident about your model assumptions too. So one thing that you can do is you can go way outside of your VAR if you can justify it. So you can, like, if your value at risk is just like, if it's just like exorbitant at that point, I mean, maybe track it back, maybe adjust what you're doing, or your position, or what you're thinking about doing. But like in the long term, if you're looking at fundamentals and you're able to justify all this stuff, then it's like, okay, we can actually get behind these trades, and we can give the green light for that. So be confident behind assumptions, because we have to assume with ethanol that, hey, this is going to be the EV demand, this is going to be charging output, this is going to be like imports for ethanol this year. We have to kind of project all this stuff and make assumptions based on historical data and whatnot, right? Just like, this is just basic financial modeling, right? We have to have these variables that are unknown to us, but we have to assume and predict this stuff. And we can make different scenarios and do all of that good stuff in Excel, and look at like probability, expected value, everything in between that. And as long as we're confident there, right? As long as we know what we're doing while we're assuming this, and we're looking at the news and saying, hey, is this different today? If so, I got to update my model, right? That kind of stuff, and doing that housekeeping there is really important. And then here's some major gaps. So one thing I like to do in these presentations is I like to look at the gaps. I like to analyze, hey, like if is there any sort of business opportunities here to be done, especially since, VCs can come along and inject some money into a company real quick. They can try to build up an IP and they'll just try to raise a Series A and Series B down the line. So these are the gaps that they would be looking for. So governments are trying to build fake blockchains. That's something that they're doing, and it's because they don't trust blockchains, because blockchains have been exploited like crazy in the past, just because people figure out how to get past the Merkle tree with a wallet. So it's understandable governments will not trust blockchains, but they are hiring more Rust developers, and that language is how you build blockchains. So I have no doubt that they're probably trying to do that, but that's a major gap. Building a secure blockchain for government entities is that's a pretty daunting task, but it's something that's necessary here. It's also very difficult to validate/verify RINs. What we were doing at Mercuria is we were using just like proprietary stuff to do it. It was really manual. It was just like, it was like, I guess the best term for it was just jank. Like it was just like, hey, this is not this is not SAP standard stuff here. Like this is like a spreadsheet to check to see if we're able to comply with company policy and accept or send these RINs. So yeah, because well, also too, RINs they come from companies, and so RINs, you could have like Red River ethanol facility, like Red River ethanol company RINs, and it's just some arbitrary company name next to these RINs that a company is trying to send to you, and you'll just sit there and you're just like, I have no idea if I'm allowed to accept these RINs, which is a problem. Like that should not be happening in a professional financial market. That's just not good, right? Because we don't know if these are real. We have no idea. It's totally it's like trading crypto, but you don't actually know if it's real Bitcoin or not. So it's just kind of, you have to be very careful about what you're doing, and you have to, as a scheduler, you have a lot of responsibility there. Also, traders share confirmations and allocations in a very weird way. So if you have a trade, so like let's just say I call in a trade, I confirm it, I say done, right? I'm gonna go to my to my phone or laptop or whatever, like wherever I'm at, and I'm gonna send an email. I'm gonna send an Excel row that I've just created with the trade number and all that stuff, and I'm gonna assume that all of my schedulers are seeing that email in their inbox and they're saying, okay, great, let's do it. It's not that's especially with Gen Z coming around. Gen Z, pretty volatile people, right? Like we gotta, it has to be kind of spelled out for them a little bit. So you have to be very detail oriented, and that's what it all comes down to. Is you got to be really looking, and you got to be responsible about it. You have to be checking your email constantly. And one thing that my parents always told me is, hey, look, a lot of people spent the whole day in their email inbox. That's really how they like to do business, and it was very apparent here. Inspections are not automated. So like I said, inspections, you have to coordinate those. You have to schedule those. You have to pay for them with invoices, and you have to do that with credit. And it's just not a good time, right? You have to you have to basically, it's a different thing to worry about, right? It's another thing, a part of a leg, and you have to do it. And then there's also, there were really just two primary barge companies for us to use in the Northeast, and that was it was like Vane Brothers and another one. And it was primarily just Vane Brothers, and the difference between the two would be pricing and availability sometimes. So it was really weird because I was like, oh, there's just two here. Like, you figure, okay, well, there's got to be more than two entities here that we like to work with. I mean, that was just their go-to, and you would think, okay, maybe we should get more into the rotation here. And then product transfer data, all on spreadsheet and email, that can be changed. That can definitely be automated, and especially since like with companies that at the startup and medium level, they'll start doing more business in Teams or in Slack. They'll actually create channels with each other, so you have a direct channel that's isolated from everybody else. So it's not like an email where you'll just have like a CC row of all of the counterparties' people. You'll actually have a direct channel with the company. You'll know what company's trying to look for you. And you could break that down even further, and you could just go into crazy just organization there and just totally optimize the market um, through that channel. Invoices the same way. Right now, they've been sending invoices from this is all internally too, right? So you have like email to invoice settlements, and then settlements back to the ethanol ops desk, and it would just be a back and forth thing. It'd take like 4 different emails just to get one invoice settled for accounts receivable, and it's just like, okay, this is a problem, right? Because like we don't want to be sending, like, our whole objective here is to make money and get the cash on the books, right? Cash flow and having the velocity of cash flow, increasing that is important. So why are we sending 4 emails? That's just how they do it, to be meticulous and to be careful and cautious, right? To make sure that we're getting it right. But at the same time, it's one of those things where if you're payable, you should be very careful and ask questions, maybe, or contest it if you don't think it's right because of the record keeping. But if we want to get cash on the books as quickly as possible, then we have to make that process a lot faster. And then this is the future, right? So I always like this, like I like to expose the gaps, but I also like to say, hey, this is the future, right? This is how we're gonna close those. So I actually got really inspired from this, and after my time at Mercuria, with my VC company, I started a computer vision company for retail. So this is a CV company for retail. It would be wholesale as well. So also kind of like that midstream stuff. And so basically, computer vision is the idea that we can use artificial intelligence, multimodal models, and specifically more like object tracking with images, or like frames of videos, and we can use those videos to track like real objects and like people and stuff like that, with an AI that's trained to do that. So like, for example, you can use like YOLO, which is like you only look once. That's a type of model, and Tracks Retail actually developed a really great data set for that. So yeah, CV, big opportunity here, because you can actually fix a camera in the facilities, or fix a camera to any logistics transport vehicle, or like just mode of transportation. You can use that to count how many lots are in this vehicle or this conveyor belt, whatever, and you can actually count up that stuff. You can do tracking too, which means it assigns an ID to that stuff, and you can relate it back to the individual like PTDs that have the quantity, or barrels, or barrels or gallons of RINs. So really interesting stuff there, especially for logistics and suppliers, because of the actual blockchain implementation, which comes next, which is, hey, let's get a real blockchain going here. Let's get some nodes running around the world, and let's uphold the national system on a blockchain that's actually verified with fungible coins or tokens that can be that can never be lost, or misaccounted for, because like one thing too is they had just gotten done with audits. So I saw all of this data with all of their past audit stuff, and I'm just like, okay, but if we have a blockchain, that is the source of truth. That's the ledger, and it never lies. Like a blockchain, whenever it's a real blockchain, will never lie to you. It cannot be exploited, and there are no mistakes, right? And you also can't undo mistakes too. But it's one of those things where, like, if we're doing this real business, we got to have a real blockchain, and it's not there yet. And so one thing that I can say is CV, that venture, I decided just to shut it down. CV is not there yet. It's really not. One of the things that I noticed with computer vision in retail is that it would link dog food to a can of beans. It's not really there yet, especially with image classification. If you pull out images, it has to be, in order to classify things and actually know what it's tracking, you have to have the image from the facility that is getting the footage. So if you're recording something at this business, if you're going to identify something, it has to be with with one of those like query images, or like it would be like from those reference images. Those reference images have to be sourced from the same location, because of the same lighting, the same atmosphere, the same look. All that matters. You'll have no efficacy for classification if you try to use stock images, right? It's just not going to work. So blockchains are also not there as well, just because of their security and how they perform, because you have to download a whole copy of a blockchain. For example, Dogecoin. In order to transact on that, you have to download like a 78 megabyte copy of that blockchain, just to be able to transact directly from your wallet on your computer. So you're basically running a local node into that blockchain, which is just not efficient at all. There's still a lot of stuff to be done there. And then phasing out the EMTS and LCFS dashboards and replacing them with wallets would be really great, because the wallets would be linked to a blockchain. You could actually see all of your K1, K2 RENs in a single wallet. It would be a place of truth. Hey, this is how much we have. You don't have to accept anything, but we could put in that functionality into that. But at the same time, like normally what happens in crypto is if somebody sends you a crypto tokens, it just appears in your wallet and you're just like, oh, I have this now. Because like the other way around is like, okay, you accept the REN's sender request, and they just, it just sits there, right? I mean, they're trying to send it to you and it's already allocated out of their inventory, but it's like, okay, you're going to reject it, and then they have to go back. And so it would just be much better just to send it and hold the sender accountable. Hey, you better make sure this is right. And then phishing scams. So a lot of the times at the bottom of it, they're like, hey, this is, do not open, fake stuff or like files, all that jazz in those emails because of phishing, right? So, I mean, basically, emails can be spoofed, and one of the ways that they do that is through MX records on a DNS server. So the actual DNS record for email with the domain that your company uses, those can be spoofed like crazy. Like I can just make copies of those. It's awesome. It's not awesome though. It's actually illegal. But basically, big security risk there, and it's really important to take the phishing out of the equation and just kind of get away from emails, because Slack and all that stuff exists, and Teams is already out there and integrated with these companies. That's a way better way to, somebody would have to steal the actual credentials of an employee to get into that, right? I mean, it's Microsoft. Microsoft is a secure company. It's established. Email is just a simple SMTP server. Like those are very old. It's a mail transfer protocol. So it's you're not going to get the best security, right? And the actual domain comes from the DNS, so we can actually spoof that, and so should be really careful there. And we can do that with Slack and Microsoft Teams. And then also private entities running government data. One thing that I've noticed is like Census API, for example, the Census Bureau data. That's really not good. And there's more like nonprofit orgs trying to get involved, trying to make it better, and just freelance people like open source code developers trying to get involved with Census API. Government data needs to be in a different place, and I think that's something that like with policy and with lobbying that can be done, but government data APIs are just non-existent. If you go look at it, there's nothing useful, and it's like this data really matters, especially with all of the government energy data out there that could be used. And one of the reasons why I believe it's that way is because of Bloomberg and all of those other major companies out there that provide data like that. All of the markets out there, they have their own dealings, and it's actually really expensive to use Bloomberg data, to have a Bloomberg node. To run it off of like NASDAQ or something like that. It's going to cost you at least $30K a month. So it's just really expensive data that they're kind of gatekeeping for themselves. And the government APIs are kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel that way, because it's supposed to be public data. They just privatize it, right? Because they have the money to do so. So private government data API providers, that could be a huge thing there, because Bloomberg has a monopoly. Every time I've talked with hedge fund managers in New York about this, they're always looking for different ways to get data. Mercuria is always looking for data. All traders at Shell, Exxon, data, right? Because it's the news. You're trading off the news. You're trading off the weather. Whatever it is, you're trading off of. The fundamentals are there, and it's in the data. You got to get the data to do that. So that's going to be I think we're going to see a lot more startups pop up there, and I think one of the biggest things that's kind of going into it is supply chain with CV, AI, and data. All of that stuff with supply chain, that's going to be the next frontier, and that's what my VC firm is investing in right now because those areas are so behind, and maybe they're not ready for the stuff that we're doing right now, but that's okay because it gives everybody time to develop and make better quality things. So, really excited for that. And that's all I have. So yeah, super awesome opportunity with Mercury. I learned a lot and really enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks and gig 'em.